We are ready with the next session, a very, very interesting session. And the session is on individual rights and social media. So, the lines for individual rights, social media has given us so much access. You know, it's overwhelming accessibility. The privacy is being violated every day, the intervention. I mean, it's a much debated subject, individual rights. You know, where do we actually draw the line? And so this session is actually a prelude to a very important summit which is coming up later in the year, which is individual rights in the age of digital media. So we are considering this session as a curtain raiser to that important summit. So I'd like to call upon the panelists for this session. I'd like to call Mr. S. Sukumar to come up on stage and take his seat. Mr. Akar Patel, Executive Director, Amnesty International India. Mr. Chinmay Arun, Research Director, Center for Communication and Governance. Mr. Pankaj Pushkar, is he here? Yes. I believe he's, okay, sure. So Mr. Pankaj Pushkar, he's the MLA from AAP. Mr. Rai Mahipath Ray, Deputy Commissioner, Bokaro District. Mr. Rohit Prasad, Professor, MDI Gurgaon. And Mr. Ruben Dikoff, Regional Program Manager, Friedrich Naumann Foundation. So Mr. R. Sukumar will be moderating this session. Mr. R. Sukumar is a part of founding team of Mint, joined HT Media in October 2006 from the India Today Group, where he was the managing editor of Business Today. He started his career at the Hindu Business Line, where he became the managing marketing editor. He then spent a little over 9 years at Business Today, where he was an associate editor and later the managing editor, with both strategic and operational leadership of India's leading business magazine. And from here on, I'd like Mr. Sukumar to take the session forward and introduce everybody in the panel.
Okay, I think Rohit is just joining us in a bit. And, I thought the best place to do a discussion like this would have actually been on social media, right? We could have all been wherever we wanted to be. Akar could have been in Bangalore. You could have been in Bokaro. Right? We could have just done what we had to on social media. I'm going to try and set the context for this. Very interesting panel discussion, which is individual rights and social media. And it comes about at an interesting time in India, interesting time in the world, because I work for what you can call big media, right? Not big in terms of profits or anything, but big media in terms of the kind of vintage and everything else that we come from. And what social media has really done is it's given the small man a voice in one way. And it's a voice that can be heard, and it's very, very uncomfortable for people like me. Right? I'm a print journalist, and I'm actually much older than I look, and sometimes I feel as old as Methuselah. But so for me, especially, it's very difficult because social media gives the small man a voice, and the unfortunate thing is many small men talk back. Right? So the conversation is no longer one way, it's become two way. And I think that is a phenomenon that you will find is affecting not just journalism, but everything else. The quality of political discourse, establishment, administration, education. You know, I think everyone in this stage is affected by it in some ways. Now, this is extremely interesting because it's happening at a time when traditional information hierarchy in India is slowly wearing down. I mean, you could argue about this, which is the best thing. I mean, you can argue about anything. But there used to be a time when control and command and everything else is a function of how much information you have. To put it bluntly, those who know rule and those who don't know are ruled. And I think that hierarchy has slowly been collapsing. And some people realize it, the smart people realize it, and they know how to use it to their advantage. The not so smart people are very, very uncomfortable with it because suddenly information that only few people know is now much more public. And it's happened because of a variety of reasons. One of the reasons it's happened in India is because of the sunshine legislation, right? I don't think too many people give RTI the kind of credit it needs to be given, but it's really helped people learn a lot that they didn't know previously. You can actually query and find information. Some smart newsrooms have reporters who are RTI specialists who do nothing else but keep filing RTIs and then doing 400-word stories on the basis of them. And then you have social media, which in its own way has helped information dissemination, because what one person knows, now many people know. And there is much maligned 24/7 television, which, all of us love to hate TV, and then we hate some TV more than we hate some other TV. But TV is instant, it amplifies messages totally. These might be the wrong messages, these might be factually wrong and everything else, but they still amplify messages hugely. So you have to see this whole thing as one huge information ecosystem where we are. And obviously in all ecosystems, like I said, there are people who want to exert control, and those kind of things will keep happening. Which is why I'm hoping that through this discussion we can look at 2 or 3 aspects. The first aspect is, again, we have some specialists on stage. The first aspect is the legal aspect, right? Which is, what are the information access rights, the privacy rights, and everything else that someone who's on social media has, and more broadly, what are the kind of laws we have in place that rules this ecosystem of information. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is, how do the powers that be, and the powers that be could be anything, right? I mean, for the purposes of this conference, the power that is Mr. Osama Manzar, who might not like what I'm saying, and the mic could suddenly go dead, right? So, or it could be companies that people work for. It could obviously be governments. And how are they reacting to it? What are the ways in which they can manage this information, in which they can control or curb this information if they want to? And we have people from the government side here, we have people from politics here, we have Rohit, who is actually an expert in various new economy issues. I must disclose conflict of interest. Akash writes for the paper for which I work. So does Rohit. Rohit writes very well on telecom. So does Osama. And Akash writes very well on outrage, right? And various other issues. So without, so now that I've set the context, I'm going to, again, no rules. I'm not going to go from person to person. So if you want to sort of jump in and weigh in on something, I'm hoping you'll jump in. Please interrupt each other. But remember, you're not on TV, so you should be polite. Wait for the other person to finish his sentence. The idea is to have an intelligent conversation, and we're all friends, so there's no need to shout. I'm going to ask Chinmay to start, because I really want her to set the sort of legal kind of framework for this, to look at this ecosystem and privacy and right to information and all of that. So Chinmay, all yours.
Okay, I didn't know that was coming. My remarks are going to be, I'm cheating a little bit. I think that everyone knows largely what the law says. Everyone knows we have the right to free speech. Everyone's beginning to understand, yes, with constraints, not as many constraints as many people would have you believe, but some constraints. We also have the right to privacy, which people are increasingly beginning to realize is very important to speech, because what you are comfortable saying or not saying can depend on who you think is listening and where they might broadcast it. Okay. But I think that where it gets complicated is actually the way in which these rights are implemented. So, for example, Pankaj outlined very neatly for you the situation of the gatekeeper, right? What are the powers that be, and how do they control speech? Now, classic illustration of this is all of you saw the Shreya Singhal case, that 66A case that was going on. And that threw up the question that, that highlights really where our legal system and our public sensibilities can go wrong. It had on one hand this 66A that everyone understood, criminalizes the individual, clearly about what individuals are allowed to say, what they're not allowed to say, and that was very easy for the public to grasp, right? Everyone was very on board with 66A carries speech regulation too far, and so maybe we should restrict it a little bit. The other piece of this was actually intermediary liability, which is that can the government use corporations to block speech and to take down speech in a way in which citizens don't have a lot of say? And that, if you noticed, was something that was much harder for everyone to grasp, this connection between this middleman who can regulate your speech, which could be editors of newspapers, except that with editors of newspapers, they have limited space. It could be telecom companies, it could be big internet platforms. And so I'm going to stop here. I'm throwing out the question so that everyone else can discuss it. You'll find that a lot of debates, from net neutrality to debates about blocking of content online, have to do with this middleman, this gatekeeping function that is provided by intermediaries, and the ways in which it's regulated by government.